Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. Now, as the world continues to grapple with the escalating impacts of climate change, from rising global temperatures to growing threats of food security and human health, science stands as the forefront in shaping the collective response. Now, under South Africa's G20 presidency, the Science20, or shortened for S20, has placed a strong emphasis on climate change and well-being, reflecting the presidency's broader theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Now, the S20 brings together the national science academies of the G20 nations to provide evidence-based recommendations for policymakers. And joining me now to discuss this, I'd like to welcome Professor Thokozani Majozi, who is the head of Science20 within the G20 framework. Prof, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's really a pleasure to be here for us. Thank you very much. And really, thanks.
No. Absolute pleasure to have you on, Prof. Majozi. No. It's an absolute pleasure, Prof. Majozi. Prof. Majozi, as the head of Science20 under our G20 presidency, can you explain the core vision and the purpose of the actual theme for the S20, climate change and well-being?
No, thanks for that, Faraz. Yeah, the core vision of our S20 theme, which, as you aptly put it, climate change and well-being, is to fundamentally shift how we approach climate action. So from viewing it purely as an environmental challenge or environmental problem, as we've always done, we should move it into putting it right at the center of human and planetary well-being. We recognize that climate change is not just about rising temperatures or carbon emissions, although that's very, very important, really. Sure. It's about health, livelihoods, food security, and stability of its life support systems. So really, it's about drawing that connectedness to the fore in our deliberations.
You know, Prof, you mentioned something interesting there. It's not just about climate change, but as humans and the planetary well-being, there has to be a focus on that, isn't it? And how has, this working group within the G20 focused on that? Because as much as we have the concerns of climate change, there has to be concerns of us as the citizens of the world.
Yes. Yeah, so I think we are right that in that regard, focusing solely on climate change can create a disconnect between scientific findings and the lived experiences of communities worldwide. So by centering well-being, we make the agency tangible for solutions and also make the solutions more inclusive. So when we say that we want to put this at the center of human or planetary health, it is really about agency or accentuating the agency of the problem at hand. Really, if you think about it, what matters most to people is the well-being. It is their health, their children's futures, their ability to feed their children, and their cultural heritage. Those are main things that matter to people. So if you don't link that to everything we talk about in terms of climate change, the message tends to lose its momentum and agency. So that is the reason why. And the way we've done it is to make sure that in all our engagements, we center this human element in the conversations. And of course, you'll see in the statement, we also touch on the indigenous peoples and local communities, particularly those in vulnerable situations. This has become very, very key in our deliberations because we strongly believe that the involvement of communities, particularly the vulnerable communities, must be right at the outset of our deliberations, from the conceptualization of our interventions to design of how that is going to take shape, whatever that shape is, ultimately to implementation. So the involvement of communities should be at the heart of all our deliberations. Their involvement must not be an afterthought. It must be genuine and deliberate.
Prof. Majozi, I think we've established that human environmental health as the first priority within the S20. Let's talk about the One Health approach. Obviously, it was in the statement or the deliberation that was given from the S20 working group. But for the viewer out there who's asking the question, what is One Health? Can you maybe briefly explain that to them, number one? And number two,
Yes.
how this very same concept is being used and the approach is being used in shaping climate and health policies within the G20 countries.
Indeed, yeah. So the One Health approach, by the way, is a very, very transformative approach. It basically it recognizes that we've often ignored one thing here, and that is that the human health, the animal health, the health of the ecosystems are inseparable. So we always talk about the human health in isolation, the animal health in isolation, and then the environmental health in isolation. But strictly speaking, these are inseparable. So you need a holistic approach in dealing with issues of climate change with that understanding. I mean, a nice example of what one is talking about here for us is the pandemics.
Yes.
The closest one being COVID-19. If you go back to COVID-19, which affected human health in a very, very big way in the global scale, it emanated from animals. There is evidence that there was animal
We seem to have lost.
with the animals.
Okay, Prof. Majozi, we lost you there but I just think if you could just repeat that again. You were discussing about where COVID-19 had actually originated from.
Yes. So if we take an example that is very, very close to home, which shows very clearly the interconnectedness of human health, animal health, and environmental health. Let's talk about the COVID-19, for example, which is still very fresh in our minds. If one looks at the COVID-19 very, very carefully, its genesis, where it came from, it was actually about the transfer of the animal diseases into the human space. So basically, these two are highly, highly interrelated. Of course, it affects the environment as well. The environment that we live in now is very, very interconnected, which is what was at the heart of that global spread of the disease, which affected the human health on a global scale. So One Health is saying, let's not look at any of these three systems separately, the human, the animal, as well as the ecosystems or the environment. Let's look at them in a holistic fashion. And in that way, we will be able to come up with interventions that are meaningful and that get applicable and adopted readily on the ground. So to do that, what this means really for us is that the G20 countries, in adopting that One Health thinking or framework, they would have to break the silos between between and among the traditional ways of thinking. So we'd have to find a situation where the health ministries and the departments work together with the environmental ministries or agencies, as well as the agricultural departments, where in the past these have operated in isolation. So One Health is saying, let's work together, because whatever happens on one end affects what happens on the other. I'm not sure if I've explained.
Yeah, no, I get exactly where you're coming from, Prof. Majozi. Prof, to end this segment, there's an emphasis within the document on food, water, energy nexus. How can governments use this or integrate these systems to ensure resilience in the face of climate disruption? I think it's quite clear that we're having, a challenge when it comes to food security, not just here in South Africa, but on a global level. So if you could maybe just break that down for us and how this can be used in the face of climate disruption at this moment.
Yeah. No, thanks, Faraz. I mean, that's a very, very, very important issue, by the way, the nexus of food, water, and energy, which has been really in the scientific domain now for quite a while, and a problem that still remains very difficult to really unlock. But just to understand what we mean by a food, water, and energy nexus, food alone tells you that it's about sustenance of life. So really the explosion of population the world over has meant that we have to increase the food provision in one way or another. And that talks to agriculture. And if you think about agriculture, agriculture is the largest user of water the world over. So we need water to grow these crops that feed humankind. But to bring water to the crops, you need pumps, you need electricity to drive those pumps. So there is energy that is required to bring water to the crops. And also to generate that energy. Most instances, we need water to generate energy. If you think about, say, I'll bring it very close to home, our ESCOM here. The electricity that we have comes from water in pulverized coal power stations, where we feed in water that is converted into steam, and that steam runs the turbines which give us electricity ultimately. So there is this interconnectedness of water, with energy and food in one way or another. Again, looking at one of those without taking the others into consideration does not yield the outcome that we are seeking for. And the solutions in the past that have been premised on that thinking have not yielded any outcome, really, that is meaningful. So in that sense, governments must develop policies that assess impacts across all three domains. We have to invest in technologies that optimize resource use, that promote sustainable consumption patterns. And here, overall, for us, the goal is resilience. When one system is stressed, the others can help buffer impacts rather than amplifying them. So that is the whole idea here. So we have to have policies at all levels, processes that use in audit.
Okay, we seem to have lost Prof. Majozi there, but Prof. Majozi, Prof. Majozi, I'm going to have to stop you there because I'm losing a bit of your signal, and it's also the break. But my conversation with you will continue after the break. Do stay tuned to Mzansi Welcomes the World. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. I'm still in conversation with Professor Thokozani Majozi. We are discussing the S20, and of course, he is the president of that very same working group. Again, thank you so much for staying with us, Prof. Majozi. Prof. Majozi, you mentioned earlier on indigenous people and local communities. There's a huge highlight from the S20 with regards to them getting to understand climate action or getting them involved within climate action. My question to you is, how can their traditional knowledge systems contribute to the evidence-based policies within the G20 framework?
Genuinely embrace the fact that traditional knowledge is also a part of what we call legitimate scientific evidence. In the past, most of our thinking has been influenced by modern science, if I can call it that. But it is a fact that there have always been people here on Earth, and they survived, by the way, with very limited science as we know it today. So definitely there's something to learn from those communities. And as I said early on, what we accentuate in our statement is that those people, the indigenous people and localized communities, and local communities, particularly those that are in vulnerable situations, should be at the central part of the conversation on climate change for a number of reasons. The first one being the one that I've just mentioned now, that they possess the knowledge that could influence science in a very big way. But besides that, they tend to be at the sharpest end of the sword when it comes to climate change. They are the ones that tend to suffer the most, yet they contribute the least, if any, at all to climate change. So I would say that this is for those two main reasons that we felt that we should heighten our seriousness in terms of embracing those communities in the broader scheme of the climate change deliberations.
Prof. Majozi, within the statement, there's an identification with significant gaps between current adaptation efforts and what is needed. How do we close that gap from a scientific standpoint?
Indeed. Okay. Yeah. As far as closing that gap would have to be multi-pronged. We have to do this or approach it from multiple fronts. Firstly, we must strengthen infrastructure and early warning systems, particularly in climate hotspots, where vulnerable communities face the greatest risks. And these systems must integrate local capacity and knowledge, not just impose top-down technological solutions like we've done in the past. That's first and foremost. But secondly, we need enhanced access to regionally specific information alongside national and global data. We all know now that climate impacts are highly localized, yet many communities lack the granular information needed for effective adaptation. So improved data sharing systems then can guide evidence-based action tailored to specific contexts. So scientifically speaking, then we must also improve our capacity to model and plan for multiple scenarios or conditions, understanding that climate impacts will vary regionally and interact with local, social, economic, and environmental conditions. And I must close on that front for us by saying that the gap won't close through scattered projects. We need systemic, sustained investment in adaptation infrastructure, knowledge systems, and community capacity. So again, you'll see just on that front, an integrated approach becomes very, very important. And that integratedness or interconnectedness has been the permeating theme throughout the statement.
Prof. Majozi, within the statement, climate change, and I guess when we talk climate change, we see it as a sort of pessimistic outcome of where we are in the world. But there's been a note to say it is now an opportunity for innovation and for new markets. In the view of S20, which areas of scientific research and technology transfer holds the most promise? And I'm going to touch on developing economies, because it's developing economies that are really bearing the brunt of climate change at this moment. Prof. Majozi? Okay, I seem to have lost Prof. Majozi there, but yeah, I think a good conversation with regards to the way climate change is playing its role within the broader structures of our globe at this moment. And what's important of this is when we're looking at COP30 within Brazil, there has to be this holistic agreement with everyone, an agreement with the entire globe that climate change is important for us right now. And if there's not going to be an addressing of this from a human perspective, then we are heading for a very dark future at this moment. And that's the reason why. And it's beautiful that it's being done within the Amazon rainforest, because that is a specific area within South America that has bared the brunt of climate change. And we need to add also various corporates that have their interest within the Amazon rainforest. That interest which probably shies away from climate, but does not consider that that is the most important part of it. And unfortunately, if that's not addressed, then ecosystems like the Amazon rainforest and many others will not live the next day. And we hope that whether the corporates or the think tanks of environmental organizations, that this is taken as a huge priority, and the G20 leaders themselves need to take it as a priority aspect. Well, that's all we have for you here on Mzansi Welcomes the World. We are 7 days away from that Leaders Summit, which Hilaal TV will be bringing to you live. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.